Right, and I'm a little uncertain about the entire history of that reactor, but my understanding is that it has been modified at least twice in the 30 years or so that it's been there, and the last modification involved it running on natural uranium, and the North Koreans have got that. They've got deposits of natural uranium, but they don't have any enrichment capacity, and at one time that reactor required highly enriched uranium reactor fuel. Now, way long ago, it was when Schumer was still in the House, he got through a bill which essentially says, all these research reactors around the world, some of them in countries that are maybe unstable, that are running on highly enriched, and I don't mean just highly enriched, almost weapons-grade uranium. And there were a number of those. We've got to phase them all out, and so we'll first convert them, which you can do, to run on low-enriched fuel, or in the case of some reactors, you can use natural uranium that don't have to enrich it at all. And my understanding is, I've never been there, I don't know, is that the North Koreans themselves converted that Russian reactor from running on highly enriched uranium fuel to natural uranium. But I can't be sure of that. But anyway, it's important because of the sequences that occur. If the reactor is, as I've just said, which is also the one that David Albright and others are claiming that the North Koreans have been trying to clone there in Syria, the one that got bombed, the site that got bombed.
Right, last September 6th.
Yeah, that was supposed to have been the North Koreans building a plutonium-producing, weapons-grade plutonium, actually, producing reactor. If it was true, it would have involved the Koreans, presumably, supplying natural uranium to this reactor that they had modified to run on that. And then, according to Albright and a few other people, the accusation is that the goal was to produce plutonium for Iran in Syria using a North Korean, So here we got the axis of evil going full blast here, And all of a sudden, the IAEA is now, as we speak, or they were there for the first 3 days of this week, we're at that site, which Albright and a lot of other people are claiming was a North Korean reactor, like the one I've just been describing, that was there for the purposes of producing plutonium for Iran. Yeah, this thing is just the biggest story you ever heard of.
What's the IAEA saying about that, if they've been there for the first part of this week?
Well, they said they didn't expect to find anything because none of these people had claimed that any fissionable uranium, if it was really a North Korean reactor, it would have been run presumably on natural uranium metal. If there hasn't ever been any fuel introduced into that so-called reactor or that alleged reactor, then they wouldn't be able to find anything. But if there has been, then, they would. The detection methods are such when you go on site that you can determine, if parts per million almost. And not only that, but you can tell that if something has ever happened, like if the uranium has been enriched or if it has actually been in a reactor and has produced some plutonium, you can even, there's a signature that's associated with the decay products of that.
Well, so do you buy David Albright and the others' accusations that there was some sort of North Korean, Syrian secret nuclear program going on at that building, or what do you think was going on there?
Well, all I can tell you is that I read from this article, which, if you don't mind, I'll just read this.
Oh, please go ahead.
Part.
Go ahead.
Okay. This is from that column I just mentioned to you. Okay, the fifth round of the six-party talks, that is the ones that are being hosted by the Chinese, the PRC, People's Republic of China, includes within it an agreement that the United States and North Korea will have bilateral talks, agreements, to try to satisfy President Bush and some of the hawks or something or other about the North Korean nuclear projects, programs, and things of that nature. Now, as far as the other members of that are China, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and North Korea, and the United States. Now, we're the only people that are really concerned about their nuclear weapons program. I mean, their nuclear program. It is a nuclear weapons program now, thanks to President Bush, but it wasn't. At least they claim it wasn't, up until January of 2003. Okay. China is happy as a clam about all this, and they want to get this thing resolved, and so does Russia, of course, who basically supplied this reactor and all this other kind of stuff in the first place. Japan's principal concern seems to be Japan occupied, or actually annexed, the Korean Peninsula back in 1910 or something like that. And at the time, at the end of the Second World War, 1945, it was essentially decreed by the big three that it was going to become a single independent country again, except that there was this division at the 38th parallel in spheres of influence, and that is Russia got the top, the Soviet Union in those days. They got north of the 38th parallel, and the United States got, presumably, in our sphere of interest, the southern half.
Yeah, and then they had a giant war, and they left the line right where it had been in the first place.
Well, it's even worse than that, because the war wasn't a war, and it really wasn't authorized by anybody. The problem was, at the time, in 1950, when the so-called Korean War broke out, Chiang Kai-shek had been run out off the mainland, and he'd retreated to Formosa, which is now called Taiwan. Okay? And there was quite a bit of ocean between the mainland and Formosa. So the People's Republic of China that existed already, it had existed for a couple of years before the Korean War broke out. But we didn't recognize it. The United States didn't recognize it. The UN Security Council didn't recognize it. And so, nominally at least, Chiang Kai-shek was still holding the veto card on the UN Security Council, okay? And Russia, at the time, was boycotting UN Security Council meetings because the People's Republic of China had been denied their proper right, okay? So, when Truman went in to North Korea in 1950, or actually defended the North Koreans who had invaded from the north into the south, and we got some forces there rapidly and tried to drive them back out, and claiming a UN resolution, but we didn't really have one because neither China nor Russia, who had both veto authority over this, and for a veto-wielding power on the UN Security Council, not even being there is the same as if you vetoed it. You know, it's got to be an affirmative vote by all five of them. Okay, 2 out of the 5 weren't even there. All right, so on goes MacArthur and the rest of them, and we chase the North Koreans back in across the 38th parallel, which is where we should have stopped because they had now objected the invader. It's also important to note that since the United States and the United Nations did not recognize either North Korea or People's Republic of China, who were the major combatants on the north side, the armistice, which was signed in 1953 and which is still in effect now, more than 50 years later, is between the commanding generals of our forces, that is the U.S., and the commanding generals of their forces. That's the People's Republic of China and the North Koreans, neither of which at the time, as I say, we recognized.